The morning Owen Calloway opened his front door, 12 wrecked cars sat across his lawn like a junkyard dumped overnight on Cartmill Road. Rust, shattered glass, tires flattened into the grass his late wife had planted. Neighbors gathered on the sidewalk, phones lifted already laughing. A code enforcement notice flapped under his mailbox. Somewhere in town, Diana Voss was smiling. She wanted his land. She wanted him broken. She wanted the whole street to watch. But Owen did not shout. He did not call anyone. He walked between the wrecks, slowly, and saw something no one else did. Cartmill Road sat at the eastern edge of Millfield, where the asphalt thinned out and the lots ran deeper than the houses. Owen Calloway had lived at number 14 for 14 years, the second property from the corner. The house was small, painted the same dull cream his wife had chosen the summer they moved in. A detached garage stood behind it, larger than the house itself, with a wide concrete apron and a steel sliding door he kept locked from the inside. People in town knew him as the mechanic at the community garage on Bell Avenue. Quiet, reliable. The kind of man who replaced a head gasket for $200 when other shops quoted $8. He drove a 15-year-old pickup. He carried his lunch in the same scratched metal box he had used since he was 22. He did not drink at the bar. He did not attend the church potlucks. He nodded at neighbors and kept walking. His daughter Bonnie lived with him still. She was 23, working the front desk at a veterinary clinic 3 miles north, saving for a place of her own without much hurry. She had her mother's eyes and her father's silences. Between them, the house held a calm that visitors mistook for emptiness. It was not empty. It was full of one absent person. Claire Calloway had died 6 years earlier. Cancer that moved fast. She had planted the dogwood by the porch, painted the kitchen window frames, mint green, and finished her last cup of coffee at the table by the back door. Owen had not changed the color of the window frames. He had not moved the coffee cup until 3 months after the funeral, and even then, he had only set it on a shelf in the garage where he could still see it when he worked late. The garage was where the real life of the house had gone. Tools lined every wall in a system only Owen understood. A workbench ran the full length of the back, scarred from 20 years of use. Against the side wall, under a heavy canvas cover, sat a 1969 Ford Mustang in mint green. Claire had picked the color. She had laughed at him the day he brought the wreck home. She had ridden in it, once the engine still rough 3 weeks before the diagnosis. After that, Owen had not started it again. That was the house Diana Voss wanted. Not the dogwood, not the windows, not the canvas-covered Mustang. The land. 2¼ acres on a stretch of road that the county had just rezoned for commercial use. Voss Auto Group ran 6 dealerships across 3 counties, and Diana had spent the better part of a year buying out the 8 parcels on Cartmill Road for a flagship lot. By late September, she owned every parcel except Owen's. She had come to him personally in August. A black sedan, a tailored gray suit, a smile she used the way other people used handshakes. She had offered $320,000, 20 above appraisal. Owen had listened, standing in his driveway with grease on his forearms. He had said no without sitting down. She had raised the offer to $370. He had said no again. She had asked why. He had said it was not for sale and gone back inside. That had been the start of it, though. Owen did not know yet how far she would go. Diana Voss did not lose deals. She also did not have time to lose them. Her expansion plan was tied to a construction loan with a December deadline, and the bank had been clear that the Cartmill site needed to be one continuous parcel by closing. Owen's 2¼ acres sat in the middle of her dealership like a missing tooth. The neighbors who had sold were already gone. The Pruitt house had been demolished in October. The Lansing place came down 2 weeks later. By the first week of November, Owen's lot was bordered on 3 sides by flattened earth and surveyor stakes. At night, the wind carried through the empty space differently than it used to, Hank Doyle was the only other person still living on the road. He rented a small place 2 lots down from a landlord who had already sold to Voss, allowed to stay until his lease ran out in January. He drank coffee on his porch every morning at 6 and waved at Owen when the pickup rolled past. Twice he had told Owen that Diana Voss was the kind of woman who did not stop pushing until something broke. Owen had thanked him and said nothing more. The morning the Rex appeared, Owen woke at 5:40 as he always did. He made coffee. He stood at the back window looking out at the canvas cover on the Mustang. He went to the front door at 6:15 to bring in the paper. That was when he saw them. 12 cars. Stripped, smashed, leaking fluids into the frost on the grass. Hoods up. Windows shattered. A station wagon with no wheels resting on its brake drums. A sedan flipped onto its passenger side against the dogwood Claire had planted. They had been arranged in 2 crooked rows from the curb to within 10 feet of his porch, blocking the driveway entirely. A code enforcement notice was already taped to the mailbox post, dated the day before, citing illegal storage of scrap vehicles. The notice was the part that told him everything. Code enforcement did not work nights. Someone had filed the complaint and gotten the notice cut and time-stamped before the cars were even delivered. That took a phone call to the right office. It took a name people answered to. It took Diana Voss. By 6:45, 3 neighbors from the cross street had walked over. By 7, 6 more. By 7:30, the first phone was up and filming. Owen could hear them on the sidewalk, the soft, snorting laughs, the muttered captions. One man in a contractor's jacket called out something about a junkyard sale. Another asked loud enough to carry whether Owen planned to live in one of them. The laughter that followed was not cruel exactly. It was the laughter of people who were relieved the spectacle was happening to someone else. Bonnie came out onto the porch in her work coat, keys in her hand, and stopped on the second step. She looked at the cars. She looked at the people on the sidewalk. Then she looked at her father, who was standing on the lawn with his coffee cup still in his hand. Her face went tight in the way Claire's had when she was angry and trying not to show it. "Dad, I see them. Who did this? I have an idea." She came down the steps and stood beside him. The contractor on the sidewalk lifted his phone higher, framing the shot. Owen set his coffee on the porch rail and walked out into the lawn past the first wreck, past the second. The neighbors quieted, expecting something. A shout, a breakdown, a man finally cracking. Owen did not crack. He stopped at the third car, a late 1990s sedan, with the engine still under the hood, and bent down to look at the front quarter panel. He ran his hand along the fender. He moved to the next car. He looked at the wheel wells. He looked at the engine bay. He stepped over a puddle of oil and crouched by a rusted compact wagon with the rear hatch hanging open. Bonnie watched him from the porch. So did Hank Doyle, who had walked up from the corner with his coffee mug in his hand and was now standing with his arms crossed, watching the watchers. The phones kept filming. Owen kept walking. By the time he reached the 12th car, the one shoved up against the dogwood, the crowd on the sidewalk had begun to thin. They had wanted a reaction. They had not gotten one. And a man inspecting his own humiliation as if it were a job order was not good footage. The contractor lowered his phone. 2 of the women drifted back toward the cross street. Hank came up the driveway slowly. He stopped at the edge of the lawn where the grass met the asphalt. "Owen. Hank. You know who did this. I do. You going to call the sheriff? Not yet." The older man looked at the cars, then back at Owen. "What are you going to do?" Owen wiped his hand on the rag he kept in his back pocket. He looked at the wreck against the dogwood. The dogwood had a snapped lower branch. The trunk had a long, fresh scrape down one side. Claire had planted it the second spring they lived here. "I'm going to think about it." "They left you 12 cars. I noticed. That notice on your mailbox is going to cost you." "I noticed that too." Hank held his gaze a moment longer, then nodded once and walked back to his porch. Bonnie was still on the steps when Owen came back to the house. She had not gone to work. She handed him the code enforcement notice she had pulled from the post. The fine was listed at $1,200, accruing at $200 per day until the lot was cleared. The notice gave him 72 hours. "They time-stamped this yesterday," she said. "I know. That's not legal. It's legal enough to use against me. Fighting it takes time. Time is what they want me to lose." She studied him. "What are you going to do?" He took the notice from her hand and folded it into his shirt pocket. He looked out at the 12 wrecks on his lawn. The morning sun was up now, catching on broken glass and bent chrome. From the driveway, the cars looked like exactly what Diana Voss had wanted them to look like. A grown man's life reduced to a junkyard the whole town could laugh at. From where Owen stood 3 feet closer, they looked like something else. He had spent 14 years in Millfield as a community mechanic. Before that, he had spent 11 years at a restoration shop in Tennessee that took in pre-war Packards, early Corvettes, and once a Ferrari that a collector had pulled out of a barn in Kentucky. He had been the lead technician there at 29. He had left at 33 the year Claire wanted to settle, because the shop's hours had been wrong for the life she wanted. And the life she wanted had been the only thing he wanted too. He had not advertised any of it in Millfield. He had not needed to. He had needed a quiet garage and a quiet road, and a town that did not ask questions. What he had also not advertised was the equity stake. He had been a partner in that shop for the last 6 of his 11 years, and when he left, he had not sold his share back. He had let it sit a passive position in a business that had grown quietly while he changed brake pads on Cartmill Road. He had not touched the account in 14 years. He had not needed to. Claire had not known the number. Bonnie did not know it now. Standing on his lawn looking at 12 cars, the rest of the town had already written off as scrap. Owen saw what no one filming on the sidewalk had seen. The sedan by the dogwood had a straight frame under the dented body. The compact wagon had an engine that had not been driven hard before it was wrecked. The station wagon was a model year that collectors had started chasing in the last 18 months, and the 8th car halfway down the 2nd row had a hood badge he had recognized from 20 feet away. He did not know yet what the 8th car was worth. He knew it was worth enough that whoever had loaded these wrecks onto a flatbed had not bothered to look. He went inside. He set the coffee cup in the sink. He took the code enforcement notice out of his pocket, smoothed it on the kitchen table, and sat down with it under the lamp. Bonnie stood in the doorway. "You're not selling," she said. It was not a question. "No." "Then what?" He looked up at her. For the first time that morning, something moved in his face that was not patience. "She used 12 cars to bury me," he said. "I'm going to use the same 12 cars to bury her." Bonnie watched him. "You can do that. I can do that. Quietly. Quietly." She nodded once. She picked up her keys from the counter and went out the side door to her car, leaving him at the kitchen table with the notice and the morning light coming through the kitchen window. By 8:30, Owen was back in the garage. He pulled open the steel sliding door from the inside, walked the length of his workbench, and took down a clipboard that had not been used in 6 years. He wrote 12 numbers down the left side of the page. Beside each number, he wrote the make and model of one of the wrecks on the lawn, working from memory. Beside the 8th number, he wrote the badge he had recognized, and then he wrote in the same flat handwriting a question mark. He did not start work yet. He went back inside, picked up the phone in the kitchen, and dialed a number he had not called in 11 years. The man at the restoration shop in Tennessee answered on the 3rd ring and laughed when he heard Owen's voice. They talked for 9 minutes. Owen asked one question, listened, asked a second, listened again, and said, "Thank you." Before he hung up, he asked the man one more thing about the partnership account. He listened to the answer for a long time. He thanked him again and ended the call. Then he went back out to the lawn where 12 cars were leaking oil into the frost, and he started with the first one. The neighbors who drove past Cartmill Road that afternoon saw a man in a gray coverall moving slowly between the wrecks, with a notebook in one hand and a flashlight in the other. They saw him crouch by each car for a long time. They saw him write things down. They did not see him smile because he did not smile. But by the time the sun went down behind the empty lots, Diana Voss had cleared on either side of him. Owen Calloway had a list of 12 cars, a number beside each one, and a plan that fit on a single page in his shirt pocket. That night after Bonnie had gone to bed, he sat in the garage with the canvas cover off the Mustang and the work light angled across the hood. He did not start the engine. He never did these days. He sat on the stool by the fender with his hand on the metal and looked at the mint green paint Claire had picked. "All right," he said to the empty garage. He turned off the work light. He went inside. He set his alarm for 4:30. The 12 cars were still on the lawn. The code enforcement notice was still in his pocket. Diana Voss was somewhere on the other side of town, almost certainly already asleep, convinced she had won the week. She had not won the week. She had handed him 12 cars. The first car came off the lawn at 5:15 the next morning. Owen had rented a flatbed from a man he had known for 11 years, paid cash, and parked it in the driveway before anyone on Cartmill Road was awake. By 7, the sedan from the third position was gone. By 9, the compact wagon had followed it into the back of the garage. By the time the neighbors came out to look, 2 of the 12 wrecks had simply disappeared. He worked in the same gray coverall he had worn the day before. The garage door stayed shut while he was inside, and the steel sliding door at the back stayed locked. Bonnie brought him coffee at 10. She set it on the workbench and watched him for a minute without speaking. The compact wagon was already on the lift. Owen had pulled the panels off one side, exposing the frame. "Frame's clean," he said. "How clean? Cleaner than the body suggests. Someone wrecked the front end and walked away. The rest of it is fine." "What's it worth fixed?" $5,000 on a slow week. $7 if I find the right buyer." She nodded. She studied the bench. There was a coffee mug on the high shelf that had been her mother's. She had not seen it in years. "Dad, why did you keep it up here?" "Because I worked late, and she sat in here with me sometimes." She did not say anything else. She picked up her own coffee and went back to the house. The first counterattack came on the 4th day. A man in a county vehicle pulled into the driveway at 11 in the morning, clipboard in hand, and walked the lawn for 20 minutes before knocking. He introduced himself as an environmental inspector. He had received a complaint about fluid contamination in the soil. He needed to take samples. Owen showed him the containment trays under each of the remaining wrecks. He showed him the drum where he was collecting drained fluids labeled and sealed, and the receipt from the licensed disposal contractor who had picked up the first load 2 days earlier. He showed him the permit posted inside the garage for hazardous materials, handling dated 1997, and renewed every year since including the current one taped beside the workbench. The inspector wrote for a long time on his clipboard. He took 2 soil samples for form's sake. He told Owen the complaint would be closed by the end of the week. He drove away looking faintly embarrassed. The second came on the 6th day. A letter from the county clerk informed Owen that someone had filed a query about whether his property was being operated as an unlicensed used car dealership. The penalty for operating without a dealer license in the state was significant. The letter requested a response within 10 business days. Owen drove into town the next morning and walked into the office of a man named Marcus Reeve, a lawyer who kept a small practice above the hardware store. They had known each other since Marcus had brought in a transmission problem on a 1972 Chevelle 4 years back, and Owen had fixed it for the cost of parts. Marcus had told him then that if he ever needed anything, he should walk up the stairs and ask. Owen walked up the stairs and asked. Marcus listened for 10 minutes, asked 3 questions, and pulled a folder from the cabinet behind his desk. "A retail dealer license takes about 6 weeks if you push it," Marcus said. "But there's a private seller exemption. Up to 5 vehicles per calendar year, no license required as long as the titles are clean and the sales are arm's length. There are 12. Sell 5 under your name. The rest go through a consignment arrangement with a licensed dealer who takes a cut for handling the paperwork. I know 2 who will do it for 6%. By the time anyone files a second complaint, The cars are gone, and the licensed dealer is the seller of record. Owen looked at him. How much? For me. $1,200 for the consignment paperwork and the response to the county. Pay me when the first car sells. Owen nodded. They shook hands. Marcus picked up the phone before Owen had reached the bottom of the stairs. The first car sold on the 9th day. The sedan with the clean frame went to a contractor from 2 counties over for $4,600. The compact wagon sold 3 days later for $6,200. The station wagon, which Owen had spent 4 nights rewiring and reupholstering, went to a young couple restoring a property in the mountains for $7,800. By the end of the second week, 4 cars were gone from the lawn, and Owen had $18,000 in a checking account that had not held more than 3 figures in 2 years. Bonnie came home one night and found him at the kitchen table with a printout from the bank in his hand. She set her bag down and sat across from him. $18,000. $18,000. How much more in the lawn? 60 if I'm careful. More if the 8th one is what I think it is. She looked at him for a long time. Dad, who are you exactly? He set the printout down. I'm the man who married your mother. That's not an answer. It's the only one that ever mattered. She did not push. She got up and made dinner. He went back out to the garage. Diana Voss heard about the sales on the 15th day. Hank Doyle was the one who told Owen she had heard. He had been at the diner on Main when one of her site managers had come in to pick up lunch and complained loud enough to Carrie that the cart mill holdout was somehow turning her wrecks into cash. Hank had finished his coffee, paid his tab, and walked the 3 blocks back to his porch to wait for Owen's pickup to come down the road. She's going to push harder now, Hank said. He was standing at the edge of the driveway with his hands in his coat pockets. I know. You're not worried. I'm prepared. Hank looked at the 4 empty patches on the lawn where the cars had been. Owen, what did you do before you came here? Owen looked at him for a long moment. I fixed cars. What kind? Better ones than these. Hank held his gaze, nodded once, and walked back to his porch without asking anything else. The 8th car was the one that changed everything. It had been sitting in the 2nd row since the morning the wrecks arrived. Owen had walked past it 11 days in a row, working on the easier vehicles. First the ones that would sell fast and put cash in the account. He had recognized the badge that first morning, but he had not let himself believe it yet. On the 12th night, he pulled the car into the garage. He worked alone with the doors closed from 9 in the evening until 3 in the morning. He pulled the cowl. He checked the engine numbers against a database he had kept on a laptop in a drawer for 6 years. He matched the chassis stamp against a registry he still had access to from his old shop in Tennessee. It was a 1973 BMW, a specific production run that had been built in low numbers for European markets and never officially imported. Someone decades ago had brought one over privately. Somewhere along the line, it had been wrecked, written off, and dumped into a holding lot. From a holding lot, it had been bought as scrap by whoever Diana Voss used to source her 12 cars. None of them had looked at the chassis stamp. None of them had known what they were loading onto the flatbed. Owen did not call the buyer at 3 in the morning. He waited until 9. The man who answered was a collector named Gerald Pace, who lived in a converted warehouse outside the city and had a standing offer out on any documented example of that production run. Gerald Pace was on a plane by noon and at the garage by 5. He walked around the car twice. He crouched by the chassis stamp. He looked at Owen. How much? 85. 85,000. 85,000. Gerald Pace was quiet for a moment. He looked at the car again. He took out a phone. Made one call, listened, and put the phone back in his pocket. I'll wire it tomorrow morning. I take it the day after on a closed trailer. No public listing. No public listing. They shook hands. Gerald Pace started toward his car, then stopped at the garage door. Callaway, you used to be at the shop in Tennessee. I used to. I bought a Packard from your team in 2004. I remember the Packard. Gerald Pace looked at him for a moment, longer, said nothing else, and drove away. The wire hit the account at 10:40 the next morning. Bonnie was at work. Owen sat at the kitchen table with the bank notification on his phone and looked at the number for a long time before he set the phone face down on the table. Then he picked it up again and called Walter Briggs. Walter Briggs ran the small commercial branch of the regional bank on Main. Owen had worked on his 1968 Cadillac for 3 winters in a row, charging him only for parts because Walter had once explained to Owen in plain language the difference between an operating loan and a construction loan when Owen was thinking about buying the lot next to his garage and had decided in the end not to. They were not close. They were the kind of acquaintances who would have helped each other move a refrigerator without being asked twice. Owen drove to the bank at 11. He sat across from Walter in the back office and laid out in 3 sentences what had happened on his lawn. Walter listened without interrupting. When Owen finished, Walter took off his glasses, set them on the desk, and looked at the wall for almost a full minute before speaking. I can't show you anything that isn't public, but I can tell you which public filings to look at, and I can tell you what they mean. That's what I'm asking. Walter pulled a notepad toward him. He wrote down 3 things. The first was the name of a state filing database. The second was a docket number for a recent UCC filing against Voss Auto Group. The third was a single-sentence construction loan covenants December, deadline contiguous parcel requirement. He turned the notepad around so Owen could read it. You did not get this from me. I did not. Voss Auto Group has been over-leveraged for 18 months. The expansion on Cartmill is the deal that was supposed to fix it. If she does not close on a contiguous parcel by the end of December, the bank reclassifies the loan and pulls the line of credit on her 3 biggest dealerships. She would have conservatively 90 days before she is selling lots to cover payroll. Owen looked at the notepad. How public is this? The filings are public. The interpretation is not. But anyone with a banker friend and a free afternoon can put it together. Owen took a breath. Walter, one more question. Go ahead. If a man came in here with verified equity of around $1.4 million from a private partnership in Tennessee and a clean credit history and an interest in assuming a construction loan and buying a single dealership at appraised value, would your bank be able to structure that? Or would I need to go regional? Walter Briggs put his glasses back on. He looked at Owen for a moment. That felt longer than it was. My bank could structure it. I would want documentation on the equity. I would want a personal call with the partner of record in Tennessee. With those 2 things, I could underwrite a transaction of that size by the end of next week. You'll get both. I assumed I would. Owen drove home with the notepad page folded in his shirt pocket. He sat in the garage for an hour, the canvas cover still on the Mustang, the work light off. He thought about Claire. He thought about the dogwood with the scrape down its trunk. He thought about Diana Voss in a tailored gray suit on his driveway, offering him $320,000 for the place his wife had died. He was no longer surviving. He could see that now. He had $18,000 from the first sale's $85,000 from the BMW, 7 more cars on the lawn that would conservatively bring in another $16, and a partnership stake in Tennessee that had been quietly compounding for 14 years. He had a code enforcement notice that Marcus Reeve had already reduced to a written warning. He had a county that had stopped sending inspectors, and he had a woman across town whose entire business was by the end of December going to need him more than he needed her. He took the folded notepad page out of his pocket and laid it flat on the workbench. The third blow from Diana came the next week. A man Owen did not recognize knocked on the door. At 7 in the evening, introduced himself as a representative of a commercial real estate firm and offered $410,000 for the property, all cash closing in 10 days. Owen recognized the firm. He had seen its name on the demolition signs at the lots on either side of his. Tell her no, Sir, you might want to consider. Tell her no, and tell her I am not negotiating against an offer." The man went back to his car. Owen closed the door. 2 days later, Diana came herself. She drove a different car this time, a smaller one. She wore the same gray suit or one cut from the same cloth. She parked at the curb because the driveway was occupied by Owen's flatbed and a car covered in a tarp. She walked up the path without rushing the way she had in August and stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. "Mr. Calloway, Miss Voss, I think it is time we spoke directly. We spoke directly in August. The situation has changed. Yours has." Her expression did not move. She was a woman who had been told no in many rooms and had learned not to let her face register it. "I am prepared to offer $500,000, Mr. Calloway, closing in 2 weeks. That figure is significantly above any reasonable appraisal of this property. It is not for sale. Everything is for sale, in my experience. Not everything. Not this." She looked past him at the house, at the dogwood with the scrape down its trunk that no one had repaired. "My patience is not infinite, Mr. Calloway. Neither is your construction loan." He had not planned to say it. He had not planned to say anything at all. The words came out flat in the same voice he had used to tell the real estate man no 2 days earlier, and they landed in the air between them like a wrench dropped on a concrete floor. She did not move. Her face did not change. But something in her eyes shifted the way a window shifts when the temperature drops behind the glass, and Owen knew in the second before she spoke that she had heard exactly what he had said, and exactly what it meant. "I do not know what you think you know," Diana said. Her voice was quieter now. "I know enough. You are a mechanic. I am. And you think you can stand in the way of a company with 31 years of operating history. I think I am standing in the way of a deadline. I think the deadline is the problem. I think you came here yourself because the man in the suit could not get me to sell. And you are here because there are about 5 weeks left and no one else for you to ask." She looked at him for a long time. The wind moved through the empty lots on either side of the house. Somewhere down the road, Hank Doyle's screen door opened and closed. "What do you want, Mr. Calloway? I want you to leave my lawn alone. I want you to leave my house alone. And the next time you walk up this path, I want it to be because I have asked you to." She did not answer. She turned, walked back to her car, and drove away without looking at him again. Owen stood on the porch until the sound of the engine had faded past the corner of Cartmill and Bell. Then he went into the garage. He pulled the canvas off the Mustang for the first time in 6 years. The mint green paint caught the work light. He stood beside the fender with his hand flat on the hood. "All right, Claire," he said to nobody to the garage, to the woman who had picked the color. "Now, we work." He covered it again. He turned off the light. He went inside and he sat down at the kitchen table with Walter Briggs's notepad page in front of him, and he began to write. The town meeting was scheduled for the second Tuesday in December. The agenda listed 3 items. The third item was titled, in flat municipal language, Cartmill Road, Commercial Rezoning Status Update. Owen read it on the public bulletin board outside the town hall on a Friday morning and went home to keep working on the Mustang. He had finished the last of the wrecks by then. 11 of the 12 cars were gone from the lawn. The 12th, a coupe with a bent rear quarter, had sold to a body shop in the next county for $4,200 and been hauled off on a Thursday afternoon. The lawn was empty except for the dogwood which Owen had braced and wrapped against the winter, and the rectangle of brown grass where the sedan had crushed it down for 2.5 weeks. The bank account held $217,000 from the car sales. Walter Briggs had by the second week of December formally underwritten a transaction structure that pulled against the Tennessee Partnership equity, the cash on hand, and a small bridge loan secured by the Cartmill property itself. The numbers worked. Owen had walked them through twice with Marcus Reeve once, with the partner from Tennessee, on a speakerphone in Walter's back office, and once alone. At the kitchen table the night before the meeting, the Mustang was running again. Owen had spent 11 nights on it, working from the inside out the way Claire had once watched him work on a '67 Camaro in the Tennessee shop, and told him laughing that he treated engines the way other men treated their own children. He had laughed at the time. He thought about that laugh now often while he worked. The engine turned over on the 9th night. It ran rough for 10 minutes, and then settled into the same idle it had held the afternoon he had taken Claire around the block in it 3 weeks before the diagnosis. He did not drive it out of the garage. He covered it again gently. He turned off the light. He went to bed. Diana Voss did not come back to the house in the 2 weeks before the meeting. The real estate firm did not send anyone else. The Code Enforcement Office sent a final letter informing Owen that the original notice had been withdrawn in light of the property's compliance. The county clerk's office sent nothing further on the dealer license question. The phones on Cart Mill Road, the ones that had filmed Owen the morning of the wrecks, had moved on to other things. What had not moved on was the town. People in Millfield had begun to talk in a different way. The contractor who had laughed loudest from the sidewalk had stopped Owen at the gas station on Bell Avenue and asked in a careful voice whether Owen was taking work on a '64 Galaxy his cousin was trying to restore. 2 women from the cross street had brought a plate of cookies to the porch and not said anything about the cars at all, which was its own kind of apology. Hank Doyle drank his coffee on the porch every morning, the same as he always had, but he waved a little longer now when the pickup rolled past. The town meeting was held in the gymnasium of the old elementary school, because the council chamber would not have held everyone. By 6:45 on Tuesday evening, the folding chairs were full, and people were standing along the back wall. Diana Voss was seated in the front row, in a charcoal suit this time, with 2 men in suits beside her, whom Owen did not recognize. Owen sat in the 4th row from the back, in the same gray coat he wore to the garage. Bonnie sat next to him. Marcus Reeve sat 2 seats down with a leather folder on his lap. The first 2 agenda items took 40 minutes. The third item began at 7:30. The chair of the town council, a woman named Eileen Garrett, who had run the meeting in Millfield for 19 years, read the rezoning update from a single sheet of paper. The Cart Mill Road commercial zone had been established in May. Voss Auto Group had purchased 7 of the 8 parcels by October. The 8th parcel remained unsold. Construction could not begin until the parcel was either acquired or excluded from the zone. The council was being asked to consider whether to extend the rezoning approval into the next calendar year, allow it to lapse, or invite public comment on the matter. Diana stood up before Eileen Garrett finished the last sentence. She walked to the small lectern at the front of the gymnasium. She spoke for 6 minutes. She spoke about jobs. She spoke about tax revenue. She spoke about the 7 property owners who had sold willingly and the 1 who had not. She did not say Owen's name, but everyone in the room knew whose name she was not saying. She finished by asking the council to consider, in the interest of the town's future, what a single holdout could be permitted to cost a project of this scale. She returned to her seat. Eileen Garrett looked down the rows. Is there anyone here who would like to respond to Miss Voss's comments before we open general comment? Owen stood up. He walked to the lectern slowly. He did not carry any papers. He set his hands flat on the wood and waited for the gymnasium to settle, which took longer than he expected, because people had begun to whisper the second he stood, and the whispers took a moment to die. My name is Owen Calloway. I have lived at 14 Cart Mill Road for 14 years. I am the holdout Miss Voss is asking you to consider. The room was quiet. I am not standing here to ask the council for anything. I am standing here because I think the people in this room have heard one version of the last 5 weeks of my life, and I would like, before any vote is taken, to give them the other version. He looked across the room. He did not look at Diana. 6 years ago, my wife Claire died in the bedroom at the back of that house. She planted the dogwood by the porch the second spring we lived there. She painted the kitchen window frames the color my daughter still walks past every morning. She rode in the car under the canvas cover in my garage 3 weeks before she was diagnosed. I have been asked 4 times in the last 5 months to sell that house. The most recent offer was $500,000. A movement passed through the gymnasium. People who had not known the figure looked at each other. I have said no every time. I have not explained myself because I did not believe I owed anyone an explanation. I do not believe I owe one tonight either. But I will give one, because it has been suggested in this room that what I am protecting is worth less than what I am costing. He looked for the first time at Diana Voss. The morning 12 wrecked cars were dumped on my lawn. I did not call the sheriff. I did not call a lawyer that day. I walked between the cars, and I looked at them, and I decided I would not be moved off that land by the woman who had put them there. I have spent 5 weeks proving that decision. The cars are gone. The fines are gone. The notices are gone. The land is still mine. He looked back at the room. That is the version of the story I wanted in this room before the council voted on anything. He stepped away from the lectern. He did not return to his seat. He walked instead 3 steps to the side so that he was standing in the open space between the lectern and the front row facing the council and facing Diana Voss at once. There was a small sound in the room, the kind of sound a crowd makes when it senses that something else is coming and does not yet know what. I would also like to make an announcement. Eileen Garrett looked up from her papers. Mr. Calloway, it will take less than a minute. She nodded slowly. In the last 5 weeks, I have come into possession of a clearer view of certain public filings than I had before, and I have called in equity I have held for 14 years from a partnership I left in Tennessee. I am not going to discuss the details in this room. What I am going to say is that I have, through my attorney and through a regional bank that has underwritten the transaction, submitted an offer this afternoon to the senior lender of Voss Auto Group to assume the construction loan on the Cartmill site and to purchase the flagship dealership on Route 9 at fair market value contingent on the loan transfer. The gymnasium did not so much fall silent as stop breathing. The offer is genuine. The financing is in place. The lender has acknowledged receipt. I am not asking the council to approve anything. I am informing the town in the same room where Ms. Voss has just asked you to consider the cost of a single holdout that the holdout has made an offer of his own. He looked at Diana. She did not stand up. She did not move. Her face had gone for the first time in the 6 months he had known her completely still. Not composed. Still. The 2 men beside her looked at her, and then at each other, and then at the floor. That is all I have. He walked back to his seat. He sat down beside Bonnie. He did not look at Diana again. The meeting did not recover. Eileen Garrett called for public comment and got 3 minutes of stammering before she suspended the agenda item and moved the council into a closed session. Most of the town stayed in the gymnasium for another 20 minutes, talking in low voices until the doors at the back opened and people began to drift out into the parking lot. Diana Voss left through a side door with the 2 men in suits. She did not look at Owen as she passed. Marcus Reeve walked over with his leather folder under his arm. That went the way you wanted it to go. It went the way it needed to go. She'll counter. She'll counter. The counter came on Thursday. Diana's attorneys requested a meeting. The meeting was held on Friday afternoon in Marcus Reeve's office above the hardware store because Owen had refused to go to Voss Auto Group's offices and Diana had refused to come to Cartmill Road. They sat across a small table, Diana in a navy suit. This time, Owen in the same coat he had worn to the meeting. The negotiation took 4 hours. Diana's lender had already by then communicated to her that the loan would not be extended past December under any circumstances, and that Owen's offered to assume it was the only structure that would prevent a covenant default. She was by Friday afternoon no longer negotiating from a position of strength. She knew it. Owen knew it. The room knew it. The agreement that came out of the meeting was not a hostile one. Owen would assume the construction loan and purchase the Route 9 dealership at the appraised price, which Marcus and Diana's attorneys had agreed on the day before. The 6 other Voss dealerships would remain under Diana's ownership, refinanced through Walter Briggs's bank on terms that Owen had quietly helped structure. The Cartmill Road site would be quietly dropped from the expansion plan, the rezoning allowed to lapse. The empty lots on either side of Owen's house sold off as residential parcels. In exchange, Owen made one offer Diana had not expected. "I want you to stay on at Route 9, not as the owner, as an advisor. 2 days a week, full salary for the first year. After that, we look at it again." Diana looked at him across the table for a long time. "Why?" "Because the dealership is worth more with you in it than without you. Because the people who work there have known you longer than they have known me. And because I am not in the business of breaking people. I never was." Her mouth opened slightly. She closed it. She did not speak for almost a minute. When she did, her voice was lower than it had been all afternoon. "You could have buried me." "I could have. Why didn't you?" He looked at her. He thought for a moment about the dogwood, about the canvas cover, about the kitchen window, where Claire's coffee cup had sat for 3 months after the funeral, about the morning 5 weeks ago when 12 wrecked cars had sat on his lawn, and Diana Voss somewhere on the other side of town had almost certainly been smiling. "Because burying you was never the point." She looked down at the table. The attorneys did not speak. The radiator in the corner of Marcus Reeves' office clicked twice in the silence. "All right." They signed the agreement on the following Tuesday. The first morning Owen drove to the Route 9 dealership, as its owner was a cold one the second week of January. He took the pickup. He parked in the lot near the service entrance, not the front. He carried with him the same scratched metal lunchbox he had used since he was 22, and in his other hand, a battered toolbox that had belonged to his father. Bonnie had come with him. She stood in the parking lot with her coat pulled tight against the wind and looked at the building. "You sure about this?" "I'm sure. You never wanted to be a boss. I'm not going to be the kind of boss who needs to feel like one." She nodded. She looked at him. "Dad?" "Yes. Mom would have laughed at you. About this. About all of it." "I know she would have. She would have liked it. I know she would have." They walked across the lot together. Diana Voss was waiting at the front door, in a coat instead of a suit, with a cup of coffee in her hand and another one held out for Owen. She did not say anything when he took it. He did not say anything either. They went inside. The Mustang stayed in the garage on Cartmill Road. Owen had pulled the canvas off it for good now. He kept it under the work light, polished the keys hanging on a hook beside the workbench. He did not drive it. He did not need to drive it. It was the way it had always been, the color Claire had picked, parked in the back corner of the garage with the light catching on the hood. Some afternoons when Bonnie came home, she would walk past the garage on her way to the house and look in through the side window and see her father at the workbench, doing nothing in particular. His hand resting on the fender of a car that had stopped being just a car a long time ago. He had never wanted to be the man who took someone's company. He had only ever wanted to protect the things that mattered. The town learned to see him differently, not as the quiet mechanic on Cartmill Road, not as the holdout who had stood in the way of an expansion, as the man who had walked between 12 wrecked cars on his own lawn at 6 in the morning and seen where no one else had seen exactly what they were worth.